Welcome back to Mix Masala with TG. I am Chandan Gopal, aka Funk Blue, and a big namaste from India. For this session, we have a wonderful individual who is an artist, visual artist from the US, but is settled in Udaipur, and he has been doing his practice for a long time in collaboration with the local artists in Udaipur. And thankfully, the artist had agreed to share a lot of his stories which had influenced or had a great impact in how and why he works the way he works, right? This entire session will be divided into three parts. Part 1, an introduction. Part 2, more about his methods, process in attaining the kind of visuals he has in mind or in his ideas. And part 3 gives more stories about how visuals come about, and also as a teaser it also gives some insights about his newly published book Karkhana, a studio in Rajasthan by Waswo X Waswo. You can follow him and you can check out his works, his older works, on his website waswoxwaswo.com. And remember, people, this is Funk Blue, brought to you by TG, and welcome to the show. I'm sitting with our speaker guest, an artist, Waswo, Waswo X Waswo,
Waswo X Waswo, otherwise known as Evil O.
Evil O.
My
And
friends call me Cha Cha.
Tata. Ah, that's
Cha Cha.
that's a good
That's a good name, I know.
Tata.
I
You
like
say
being called Cha Cha.
Waswo does
But officially, I'm Waswo X Waswo.
Waswo. It's
Yes,
pretty.
Waswo.
How do you say? Tongue twister. Waswo.
It's a bit of a tongue twister. The family originally came from Russia,
Okay.
and we were Vasvovskis.
Waswo.
And then they moved through Poland into Germany, and in Germany the ski ending got dropped, and we became Vasvos.
Okay.
And then a lot of the Vasvos moved to different countries. A whole lot of them moved to New Zealand,
Okay.
and a small, very small group moved to the U.S. And
Alright.
in the U.S., the pronunciation got Americanized to Waswo.
Oh.
That's how Waswo came about.
So, like you were born in the U.S.
I was born in the U.S. I was born in a town called Milwaukee, which is an hour and a half north of Chicago. And we're known for manufacturing beer and Harley Davidson motorcycles. Very working class town, very working class town.
Harley Davidson.
But we have a beautiful art museum, the Calatrava Art Museum. It was designed by Santiago Calatrava, the Spanish architect, and it's just gorgeous.
Okay. Okay. That's totally.
It has a movable brise soleil, looks like wings that goes up and down,
Okay.
like this, according to the light situations. And it's a beautiful art museum. It has a good collection too.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the curating that isn't so good, but the collection is good.
Right.
No. First, I have to ask: is this going to be a hit piece? Is this going to be titled "Tessin Gopal Destroys Waswo X Waswo"?
No.
No.
No. This is more like a friendly conversation. One interesting way to look at it is because I've never met you before, right?
Right. No, it's our first time.
We have never.
But I like your Spotify station. It's good.
And being in Udaipur, it's one of my favorite place. Also, I come here time to time to visit my friends here and do some music, and some pretty. And I love the lakes here and the mountains also because it reminds me of my home, McLeodganj. It's a mountainous area, but yeah, I thought like this time, why not meet up with you and get to know about your story, like what's your journey, and what were maybe certain things that made you decide that yes, I want to go to India, and I want to maybe so
So you want the usual, like, brief bio of how I ended up in Udaipur, a boy from Milwaukee who grew up with a beer and Harley Davidson motorcycles?
yeah, after you mentioned like you come from such a place, I'm like curious now, like
because US is like totally different, and India, and you understand now.
I'll give you my brief bio in a nutshell. The unfiltered brief bio, not the one that I put at the beginning of the blurbs of my books. Okay.
Okay.
So I was born in Milwaukee, lower middle class family,
Mm-hmm.
suburban home, very white environment. But I was part of the whole hippie movement when that came about during the Vietnam War.
All right.
And many of us during that time, we didn't really want to fit into the system in any way. And I rebelled against my parents, and I said, I moved out of the house when I was 18 with my first boyfriend, Eugene.
Okay.
And I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I was actually studying English literature and creative writing. I thought I would be a writer, and I still am a pretty good writer, if I say so myself. I did learn something there, but I was a dreamer. I wanted to be a poet, a short story writer, maybe a novelist, something like that. Worst came to worst, I'd end up a professor in a university. Well, it turned out I got very hooked on drugs and drinking, ended up dropping out, never got a degree, became kind of a stoner waste. This is all true. And my brother died at an early age. He was the opposite of me. He was very straight-laced. He was totally into math and engineering and very early into the computer scene. He died, and I inherited a small amount of money from him, not much, but I used that amount of money to buy a house in an integrated neighborhood on Milwaukee's west side. Lived there for many years, and then a man named Edward Farber came about.
So you were around what age, like around that time?
Oh, early 20s.
Early 20s.
Early 20s. I was 21 years old, and I had my first house.
Oh.
And it was a matter of luck. I mean, it was sad because I loved my brother. He was a big influence on me in teaching me to think as a rationalist, a secularist. He was very much into science. Okay. And didn't have much appreciation for art, but he had a lot of appreciation for science, which still influences me. And then, so anyway, when I had the first house, I was kind of lost, and I was doing just working class jobs. I worked for years and years in a screen printing plant called Ryan Screen Printing, and we did not print anything beautiful. We printed screen circuitry. So we were printing circuitry for membrane switches, which are the sort of switches that you find like on a microwave oven or something like that, or an air conditioner. And
was that like the only option that you had at that time?
It was the best option I
was the
could
best
find
option.
because I didn't have a degree, and I did have some interest in craft and art even then.
All right.
And it was a very gay-friendly shop. Nearly everybody who worked there was gay.
Okay.
A couple of lesbians and a lot of gay guys, a couple straight people who had a hard time fitting in, honestly. But they did, and we had fun. But I learned a lot about printing, and I developed a great appreciation for it because I remember my boss, Tim Elmer, he was the foreman at the time. I asked him, well, how long will it take me to learn how to screen print? And he said, well, you can learn the basics in a day or 2 days. But to really know it, you'll be like learning the piano. You have to practice it for years because there's all different kinds of materials and inks and weather conditions, and there's so many factors and variables you have to deal with in making a good one. And our prints had to be perfect. They were very, very precise. We had specs that had to be within, like 1/100th of a millimeter or something like that.
So it was like production center where you
had. It was a production center, and eventually I became a foreman there and all of that. But I developed this appreciation for printmaking. I learned that printmaking is difficult, and this was screen printing, which is one of the easier forms of printing, actually. So anyway, I did that, and then in the meantime, I had a friend who brought a friend of his named Edward Farber to my house, and Edward Farber was an amazing man. He was a photojournalist. His photos always appeared in the newspaper. But he had patented a lot of equipment on photography. So he had patented the strobo flash, which could catch like a bullet going through a rope or something like that. He had patented some of these strobo flashes, and made a lot of money doing that. He had a giant house on top of a hill outside of Milwaukee overlooking a lake, very Udaipur-like, you know.
Okay.
And but he took an interest in me. He was an older gay man, and he one day literally put a camera in my hand, and he said, "This is your passport. It is your key to the world." And I didn't understand him. And he said, "What you need to go," he said, "there's a place in Milwaukee called the Milwaukee Center for Photography. Enroll in that. I will help you. You go to school, you learn photography, and this will open up doors for you, because with the camera, doors will open. All you have to do is say you're a photojournalist, and you can go anywhere."
All right.
So he encouraged me and got me thinking again. And I stopped doing the drugs. So he died shortly after that, but he got me on my way. I studied at the Milwaukee Center for Photography for 3 years. Learned chemical process photography. It was a very old school black and white Ansel Adams kind of school. But very early on, I built my own darkroom in my house, and I discovered a love for sepia toning, which is a chemical process. So I learned how to sepia tone a photograph, and I loved the fact that it just took you out of the present reality and took you into some sort of mystical other world.
I think this is a very important story that you are sharing now, because it gives me and whoever is listening, why photography approach is coming in your work now also,
Yes.
because you look at your artwork, and you can see, like, even though you had mentioned that these images are hand painted, but very photogenic, it has that photographic elements also depicted within the paintings.
Yes,
also,
yes.
and it's a very interesting story to actually know.
Well, this is an evolution, and first of all, I have to say, like, the original sepia photographs, which became my first book here, India Poems, which were all sepia photographs, chemically processed. Sepia tone is a very specific process that gives you this gold, this rich brown color, and people now equate sepia tone with nostalgia, because old photographs always had kind of that brown tinge.
So you
to it.
worked a lot with films and
Yes.
analog.
And it was all analog.
Right.
Digital hadn't been invented yet.
A friend who is a bird watcher. He works now in the United Nations for environment or something.
Okay.
So he was like my mentor for photography, and he had come to Dharamshala to do a research on the population of vultures. So the number of vultures were going down because of some issues that were happening. So he was there for documenting this thing. And so yeah, my mom introduced me to him, and from very young age I was really much into wildlife and doing photography of birds and things like that. And he would hand me this. I was just like the, how do you say, what's that word called? Just holding his equipment.
Right. You were the assistant.
Yeah, and I was really young, and the cameras were like so heavy, and he has those like really
Those giant
giant
telescopic lenses. You need
and
those for doing
early in the
bird
morning I had to
photography.
go, and he would tell me to, like, come with me, and after a year or so, then he gave me a camera, and he was like, now you start shooting, and I couldn't even like hold the camera, but it was very heavy. So I was like always into drawing.
So he was your Ed Farber. He got you going.
Yeah. So
Okay.
and he always, my mom and everyone in the family always supported me, because like I used to be very quiet. Even in college also, if you ask, very few people I talk with openly. Otherwise, I normally just stay in my own zone. I'm like that kind of person. But yeah, and I think that's very important. Like, when you have a friend or someone who tells you, gives you something, and they're like, okay, you do this, and things are going to open up.
Yeah.
I think it's very important.
You need older guides in life.
Mhm.
And I really feel that's so true. And I mean, I was lost when I was young, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life. I wasn't sure. My mother was an artist. She painted.
All right.
She did very traditional landscapes and oils. I had a cousin, actually it was my cousin's husband, Ed Green, who worked with the Milwaukee Public Museum, which was a natural history museum. But he actually supervised the teams of artists that painted the backgrounds of the dioramas. So you'd have like the taxiderm tigers or lions or something in a display case, and then he supervised the artists who would make it look real with the painted background and all of the props. And I used to go to the museum, and I would be left behind the scenes in the museum all the time because I could go visit Ed, and he would show me these different things, which was, and this is the Department of Entomology or something like that, And I'd see the man who made the giant insects out of fiberglass and all of this. So that was part of it. And then his wife, Doreen Green, was a teacher of art in the public schools. And I had a couple aunts, great aunts, who lived in the Rocky Mountains. And they had actually died. I think one of them had committed suicide, but they also painted landscapes. So in my family, and even my father dabbled in painting a little. So in my family, there was no stigma about wanting to be an artist, but everybody said it's very, very hard. You can't support yourself on it. It's going to be a very difficult journey. Which it was, and still is. I work all the time, contrary to popular belief. And anyway, I want to go back to the sepia and my journey, because sepia, everybody thinks is nostalgic now, but that's only because we look back and all the old photos are brown. But originally, sepia was thought to be more rich and a more beautiful photo than the pure black and white. So initially, they sepia-toned photos because they thought they were more beautiful. And it's also more archival because the sepia process actually helps fix the photo better and make it better for preservation. So anyway, I did India poems, and then I thought, well, my connection with India, how did that happen? My father had been in India during World War II.
So before we get into India,
I'm just rattling through my bio,
but
you can interrupt me at any time.
So you had your camera and you started taking photos, and during that period, how did you decide? Like, were you just taking pictures of randoms?
I was like any young photography student, and I was taking pictures of almost everything. And I have kind of a funny story about that, because our first assignment was to photograph a plant and put it up against a black backdrop and put it up against a white backdrop and photograph it with different settings and exposures and see how they varied. Very basic. And I took this stupid Sansevieria plant. We call it a snake plant. It's a very dull house plant. And I just took it like a science experiment. I just photographed it like they said. I brought it in. And when I went in, all the other students in the class had these beautiful photos of plants, and mine was just this dead-looking plant sitting in a pot, totally not artistic. And the teacher was like, "You didn't do anything with it. You didn't do anything with it. You have to do something with it," like that. And then something clicked, and it was like, yes, of course, I'm supposed to be here to make art. I'm not just doing science experiments. So I was a slow learner sometimes. But anyway, my father had been in India World War II and Mumbai, and then up to Karachi. It was before partition. He ended up on the base of the Himalayas, working with what was now called the Flying Tigers, but he was totally ground-based, flying armaments over Burma, over the hump into China, and then he ended up in China at the end of the war. So he had a big photo album, which I still have, which is titled China, Burma, India. And as a kid, I would look through that photo album, and I was just entranced. So I always knew I wanted to come to India.
All right.
And first time I came was '93. I only spent like 10 days. Landed in Delhi. India was a very different place in '93. There was no metro. There were still cows walking around in the middle of Connaught.
After 1 year, I was born.
Yeah, and I had such culture shock. I literally hid in my hotel the first 2 days. I was afraid to leave the hotel. And then I finally got out and about, and I was captured by an auto rickshaw man.
So you had an idea about India through
my dad.
Through your dad and photographs.
Right.
Okay, and when you
But I still experienced the culture shock.
okay, you
Yes.
experienced.
I don't
Okay.
think I would these days because India has so modernized.
All
But
right.
in '93, it was still rather third worldish,
Mhm.
even in Connaught
Okay.
Place. So, and I hadn't experienced that before, honestly. And so I was captured by a rickshawwala, and he took me to a travel agent down some dark alley, and at night. And they said, "Where do you want to go?" And I knew I wanted to go anywhere but the Taj Mahal because I knew everybody did the Taj
Yeah.
Mahal. I wanted to see
Uh-huh.
something different. So I pulled out my Lonely Planet guide and I opened it up and there was a photo. And the photo showed this beautiful lake with temples and ghats, and underneath it said Udaipur. And I said, I want to go to Udaipur.
All
And
right.
so they sold me a round trip ticket, air, from Delhi to Udaipur, and 10 days, I think it was, at the Hotel Hilltop Palace, which is a rather nice hotel. And the whole package was $400 at the time.
Mhm.
So I came to Udaipur. I had a wonderful rickshawwala named Khan, and Khan drove me all around. There was a boy staying in the hotel named Sarab, who I met, who was an Indian businessman, and he actually treated me to dinner at the Lake Palace. In those days, you could just go to the Lake Palace for dinner if you wanted to.
Oh.
So Sarab and I went on the boat to the Lake Palace, and he treated me to dinner. I was surprised, but he had some money. He was a businessman, and he wanted to show me a good time. And then afterwards, we took off our shoes and we dangled our feet in the lake, waiting for the boat to come. And when we got back, we decided we would walk back to the hotel,
Uh-huh.
which is quite a distance. So we literally walked through the streets of Udaipur with bare feet
Oh.
back to the hotel. And I never will forget that. It was such a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Were you also doing your photography?
Not at that night,
Not
no.
at that night.
And I did take some photos on that trip, though, with I think an old Nikon FE2 or something. It was before I bought my Rolleiflex.
Okay.
And so anyway, I fell in love with the country, and when I went back to the U.S., I found, even though I'd been away for almost a year, because I'd gone to Australia, New Zealand, other
Mhm.
places, Thailand, all I did was talk about Udaipur in India. So then, next time I came back was 1999. I spent a month here, the month of March. I went to Jaipur on the train, and I met a taxi driver named J2 who had an old Ambassador taxi.
Mhm.
I still have a photo of him. It's called My Private Driver J2. It's a beautiful photo.
Mhm.
And he drove me around Rajasthan. So he drove me to Jodhpur and then Jaisalmer and Bikaner. We made the circuit. Not Udaipur that time.
Okay.
And I fell in love with Rajasthan totally. Had a wonderful time. And then in 2000, the end of 2000, Tommy and I came here the first time together.
Mhm.
And Tommy also took him a while, but he fell in love with it by the time we got to Pushkar. And speaking of this, by that time, I had looked at that Lonely Planet guide again.
Huh.
That photo was mislabeled. It was Pushkar, because now when I look at the photo, I know this is Pushkar, and then underneath it said Udaipur. So I said, it's not Udaipur, that's Pushkar, I could see. So I actually came here totally by mistake. And but we had this wonderful time, and then we both just decided we wanted to stay here as long as we could. And one thing led to another, and then pretty soon we were spending 6 months of the year here. Then we were spending 8 months of the year. Then we were spending 10 months of the year here. And then finally we sold all of our property in the U.S. We just said we're going to live in Asia. But India's immigration laws has become more and more strict. So technically, I'm not supposed to be in India for more than 6 months at a time now.
So you come in like.
I have to go to
tourist
Thailand.
visa.
Tommy moved to Thailand. I generally go visit Tommy for a few months of the year.
Uh-huh.
And if I'm lucky, I apply for an extension. So I might be able to swing like 8 months of the year in India. But every year I have to spend about 4 months out of the country.
Okay.
And that's generally my Thailand time when I go to
Okay.
Thailand. I never go back to the U.S. I mean, I just went back to the U.S. now because there was a new museum opening that has some of my collection in it. I gave a talk at the Asian Society, the Society for Asian Art at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and I had some things to do there, but normally I don't go back to the U.S. much at all, maybe once every 5 years or something like that.
All right. And when you just now you told me that you had done an opening, right, for the museum.
Hmm.
You had gone there to give a talk. And
I had formed.
how was the response
What
there,
happened
like?
is, when we sold our houses in the U.S., because Tommy and I had bought a lot of houses in the U.S. as rental properties,
Mm-hmm.
really how we made our money. You know, they would use the term property dealer here,
Okay.
and we just called ourselves landlords. And we rented to young Gen Xers who all liked us as people because they thought we were kind of cool. And but anyway, we made our money, and then when we sold the houses, the housing market was very high, so we got a lot of money came in, which we live on, and helps us live at any rate. And so then I forgot what your question was.
So the question is, like, when you were when you were giving your talk there in the Asian Society Museum.
I've always been like into giving back to India because to me India's been so good to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very rare that a foreign artist in India gets any kind of attention. And if they do get attention, it generally lasts for one exhibition and then it's over. But India has had some sort of fascination with me, so I'm rather lucky because I've been in the news now since 2001.
What's your
So,
I mean, because you're coming from US and you're living here now in Udaipur, the kind of interactions that are there with Indian artists and foreign artists, like outside artists, regarding your work, how is it? How do you see yourself?
wow. Well, I was going to answer the first question first, but how
Okay.
do I see myself?
Because it's a lot of back and forth, and for you also.
Well, I decided that I wanted, when I did the India poems photographs, I decided that it seemed to me like most foreign artists, be they American, British, French, Australian, or Japanese,
Mm-hmm.
when they came to India, they photographed here, then they always went back to their home countries to have exhibitions. And I thought I really want to exhibit in India because I want feedback from Indians. So we organized the Traveling India Poem Exhibition, and Rajan Pulari, the printmaker, became a friend because he was based in Goa. That's where I met him. And he suggested I go to Alliance Francaise in Goa and pitch a show.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that.
So that was your first show in India?
It was actually my second, because my first show was at Kashi Art Cafe in Kochi.
Okay.
Because I was friends with Anup Skaria, who's now passed away, and Dory Younger, who ran Kashi. And then Alliance put me on the circuit, so pretty soon I was showing at Alliance Francaise in Bangalore, and we went to Sri Lanka. We showed them at Alliance Francaise in Colombo and in Kandy, and this is when, I still didn't have a lot of money. I had an assistant named Shrinu who was from Hampi, and I was so paranoid. I was so paranoid that people would scratch my photos if I let other people frame them. So I had the frames made, and I always would put the photos in myself.
Scratched your photo means?
I was because the silver gelatin prints scratch very easily.
Yeah.
And they take so long to make. Each photo takes like a day to make. So I was very paranoid about them getting damaged. So I always got very heavily involved in the framing and the cleaning, and every time we shipped, I would take them out of the frame so that if the glass broke, they wouldn't scratch the photograph.
The entire process of bringing out the picture was also at that time you were doing in India, right?
No,
Or
I was
was it
at
like-
that time I was still printing back in the U.S. All those photos were
Okay,
printed.
so you would come to India, take photographs, and you would process it in
Yes,
US?
I processed in the U.S. That's before we sold the houses. All the
Okay.
processing was done
All
there.
right.
And
how
so
was the
like
response there?
in Sri Lanka, I remember taking all the photographs up to Kandy on the train. And I remember we printed the invitations in Colombo, and then they needed them in Kandy, and we ran up on the train to Kandy just to deliver the invitations 2 weeks before the show, and then we went back to Colombo. So we did all these crazy things, and then what was happening at the time? The show
Kochi.
in Colombo, I think it was. Under George Bush, we were bombing Iraq, I think it was. And if you remember, the French did not join us on that, and there was a lot of tension between the French and the Americans, and the Americans were actually going out on the steps of the Capitol and pouring out bottles of French champagne because they were so angry at the French, you know. And so suddenly I was at Alliance Francaise, and I was an American, and the director of Alliance Francaise was very adamant. He said, I want you to bring the American ambassador to this opening. So I said, okay, I'll try. So I had to go to the embassy and ask for an audience with the American ambassador, but he wasn't in town. But I got in contact with the first secretary or something like that, came to inaugurate the show. You know, but that was a little political knife, you know, a little political knife. The Americans have to come and inaugurate that. We want them in this building, you know. So we had so much fun doing it, actually, you know, in retrospect. And then, and I was horrified when I went to the American embassy in Colombo because they had a beautiful Frank Stella painting, and the current first secretary or whatever had it hanging in his office, and he said, you know, when I took over this place, they had it stored in the janitor closet with the brooms and the mops and everything else. And he opened up the door and he said, my God, that's a Frank Stella. And it was a big one. And he had it pulled out and hung in his office. And so, you know, he said, I don't know what goes through people's minds. Anyway, so that all happened. And then, so the controversy started to erupt because many Indians and Sri Lankans really loved the photographs because they were pictorialists. They were beautiful pictures of landscape and very nice portraits of people. But then I had people jump on me and say they were Orientalists and had a white gaze. And I often heard, why are you photographing poor people? It was sort of like, why aren't you photographing the modern Indian with their SUVs? Because India at the time was locked in this rivalry with China because they were both being promoted as the rising tigers of Asia. So they wanted me to portray a modern, developing India, whereas I was fascinated with
the people, the spectating people.
Yes.
They were more
some
inclined.
Some of them, you know. Generally, the ones who went through university and had that postmodernist viewpoint.
We do get a lot of debates when. When it comes down to photography, you know, in fine arts or in art communities, there's always this debate, you know, like when outsiders, like foreigners, they come out and they always tend to focus on the poor and the dirty aspect of the society.
But to me, all of my photographs are beautiful. I mean, the people I photograph are beautiful in their features and the way they carried themselves and just their poise and everything else. I mean, it wasn't like I was photographing people, you know, eating in the mud or anything like that, you know. And I've actually, you know, since then, I gave a talk in Jaipur at the beginning of the Jaipur Photo Fest one time, which was well attended. People flew in from Delhi for it, actually, and I was the first talk on the inaugural night. But I've done this in other places as well, and that is I will show a series of photographs on the screen. And I'll tell people, I'm not going to tell you who took these.
Okay.
Just look at them, and I want you to raise your hands. I'm going to ask you, raise your hand if you think this was photographed by an Indian, or raise your hand if you think this is photographed by a non-Indian foreigner.
All right.
Okay? Over 50% of the time they would get it wrong.
Okay.
And to me, that totally disproves this idea of a white gaze.
Yeah.
It's like, if you can't tell who's white and who's brown without being told, then don't talk to me about the white gaze.
Exactly.
You know. Now, I do believe there's such a thing as a colonial gaze, because when you look at the old colonialist photographs, obviously there was we're the masters, you're the conquered, line up in front of this backdrop, and they all look miserable and sad, and they don't even want to be there. And those ethnographic photographs make me cringe. But to compare that to what I do, to me, it's apples and oranges.
And lovely people, this is the end of part 1 with the artist Waswo x Waswo. we will be continuing his stories and other important aspects which I figure is very vital for an individual to understand the ideas of an artist and how it comes to be, the final product or the final artwork. So yeah, more on part 2 and part 3. Thank you for listening, and remember, you can follow me on my social media pages. It will be a big help if you can share it with all your friends. And yeah, if you have any questions, anything that you would want to share, do let me know. You can DM me in my social media pages, and you can email me